Hi guys, thanks for joining me, Kari Larson with the Yes Lifestyle. Today has been an all sourdough, all day type of day for me here. And right now I wanted to show you how I make my gluten-free sourdough bread. It's a little bit different process than you would normally use for a traditional sourdough bread. Traditional sourdough breads often have a double rise process. So you make a dough, you let it rise, you let it then you punch it down, shape it, put it in your pan and let it rise one more time before baking. This gets put together in the bowl. It gets put into the bread pan. There's really no shaping because the dough is softer. And then it sits in the pan and rises once before a bake. So what we're going to start with is some of our dry flour. So again, this is gluten-free. My starter here is made from and fed with this King Arthur gluten-free flour. I've tried other gluten-free flours with success as well, but this is the one I wanted to try specifically and have been sticking to for this starter. So we're gonna do 1.5 cups of the King Arthur flour, and this recipe will be on my website, so don't worry. You can always reference that, theyeslifestyle.com. So 1 cup plus another 1/2 cup. I want to get rid of my flour there too soon, almost did. Now I shake it, so I scoop it rounder than it needs to be and get it a nice level shake. So the flour's not really packed down, it's in there loosely and evenly. It's for a nice even measure. Some people actually spoon the flour into their measuring cups and level it off with a knife. I just kind of dump a big amount into it within the flour bag and shake it level. It's just my approach. So then I also use a cup of millet flour. Now one thing I love about millet flour is both the texture as well as the fact that it's cheaper than a lot of your other gluten-free flours. So it's actually something I really look forward to experimenting with for other recipes as well, but I haven't done so outside of my sourdough bread yet. It's got a little bit of a yellowy color, kind of a yellow cake color to it, which is fun too. And it's a nice smooth flour. So I like it, and I feel like it works really well in this recipe just to help with the overall texture. So again, just a level cup of the millet flour. And then 1 cup of gluten-free oat flour. I make my own oat flour. All I do is I buy a bag of gluten-free oats. Trader Joe's is great, the cheapest gluten-free oats I've found. And I grind it in a coffee grinder. So that is how I make my oat flour. I just basically set it on an espresso grind, look till it's nice and fine. You'll know when it looks like flour, you don't want it too granular, too coarse still. So 1 cup of my oat flour. Now I'm gonna stir that around a little bit. I'm gonna add my teaspoon of salt, so just a teaspoon of sea salt. I'm gonna mix that in a little bit. I've also been working on a regular sourdough bread recipe and video for you guys today. So my slightly larger mixing bowl is occupied with that right now. But that's all right, we'll make this work. All right, so to this, I'm gonna add a few things. Gluten-free recipes often need the use of an egg to help it hold together. I have found, I haven't tried an egg with this recipe, but I do use a flax or chia seed egg. So a flax or chia egg is an egg replacer, an egg substitute, and it's basically 1 tablespoon of ground flax meal or ground chia seeds to 3 tablespoons of hot water. So 1 teaspoon of either the ground flax or chia and add, tablespoon, and add 3 tablespoons of hot water to that. It needs to be hot. That's gonna activate it. That's gonna make it gelatinous. And let's see if I can show you here. It gets gooey, gelatinous like an egg. All right, so that's gonna be kind of your sticking power, help hold this all together. Plus flax and chia both are amazing for you just for nutritional value in your diet. Now, my FODMAP people, you know who you are. This is only 2 tablespoons, 2 flax eggs worth of flax meal. So 2 tablespoons of flax meal to the entire loaf of bread. So you are totally fine with this recipe. You're not going to exceed your recommended amounts. With that, a little bit of sweetness, I'm gonna add some maple syrup. You can do maple syrup or honey. I'm doing maple syrup again for my low FODMAP friends. And we're gonna do 3 tablespoons of that. And I'm just adding all my liquids into kind of a little well here in my dough. So that's 3. Now I'm going to add 1 cup of my gluten-free sourdough starter. Again, this starter was created using the King Arthur sourdough starter, and I made it and have continued to feed it with equal parts water and gluten-free flour. Whenever you're using water in your recipe or in your starter, you need to make sure it's not tap water. You guys, the chlorine that's in tap water, the fluoride that's in tap water will kill and inhibit and fight with your natural yeast that you're trying to create and encourage to grow so that it creates the bubbles and the rise for your dough. So that being said, avoid tap water. Use some distilled water, filtered water, something along those lines. So we're gonna use 1 cup of the starter. I'm gonna dump that in with all my other liquid ingredients here in the middle, and this bowl's getting full, but that's all right. All right, now to all of that, I need to add 1.5 cups of water approximately. I say approximately because depending on the consistency of your starter, sometimes a little more or less is needed. So again, I have 1.5 cups of distilled water here. I'm gonna add about 1 cup of it and stir that in. And then I'll gradually start to add that other 1/2 cup. So I'm just gonna get this mixed up for you, and we'll be back in a second. All right, we got it all mixed in, and I did only use 1 cup of water. So again, add 1 cup, have an extra little bit there if you need it, but you might not. It is a gooey dough. It's sticky. It's, you know, not even as thick as cookie dough. So you don't want it you want it close to cookie dough consistency. I would say that's what this reminds me of, is about a cookie dough consistency. It's not something you're gonna need, as in need like dough kneading. Now to my gluten-free sourdough, I love to add some soaked seeds. So I've taken 2 tablespoons of gluten-free oats, 2 tablespoons of quinoa, and 2 tablespoons of sunflower seeds, and I soak those overnight. You can soak them for 6 to 8 hours. I did mine overnight. If you forget, what you can do is when you sit down to start your sourdough, cover them in hot water, and that'll soften and activate them. But the longer you can soak, the better. For the same reason, it's great to ferment, aka use a sourdough rising process. It's a fermentation process that takes place. Soaking a seed, the same thing, is breaking down those acids, the acids you don't want, that make it harder for your body to break down and digest those seeds and grains. So this starts that process for you, and it makes it more accessible and bioavailable for your body, all the nutrients in it. So we're gonna dump that in and stir that in as well. And if you wanna see more information on the benefits of sourdough and why soaking grains and different things like that, check out my blog post. I did a whole post on it about a week ago regarding just bread in general, but it applies to seeds, nuts, and your grains like your wheat. So we're gonna just stir this in here. It looks so good, and it tastes great. It adds just a wonderful, I think, nutty flavor to the bread. The first time I made this loaf of bread, my oldest son was there when I deemed it cool enough to first slice into. And he's like, "Can I eat this instead of dinner?" I said, "No, you still need to eat dinner, but I'm glad you like it." But he just wanted to fill up on bread that night. So it's good. And 10-year-old approved, thankfully. Love it when my kids enjoy eating healthy things. So I'm just kind of folding these in, and that looks good to me. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and put it in our pan. Now I have a pan that I've lined with parchment paper. I lightly oiled the paper and lightly dusted it with some of my dry gluten-free flour. So oiled and floured, and we're gonna scoop it into here. Kind of get it down in the middle of your parchment paper. Just get it all in there. I don't want to lose any of it. It's such good stuff. I want to get it all out. Now, we're gonna try to smooth and shape the top of the dough. You can wet your fingers with water, or you can use a rubber scraper, a rubber spatula, to try to smooth it out and press it on and shape it. So it's just kind of messy on top right now. So I have a scraper, just dipped it in some of the water there. I'm gonna try to push it into the corners a little bit. Push it into the sides a little. So the water keeps it from sticking, essentially. It'll stick to the spatula otherwise. So just kind of pushing it into the corners and into the sides first. Getting it over to the edges. Again, not a texture you would maybe expect for a bread dough or a sourdough, but we're working with gluten-free. It's different. So once I'm happy with how it looks as far as just getting into the corners, then I'm gonna kind of smooth it out, maybe tamp it down just a little bit on the edges so it rounds up a little bit more in the middle. Give it a little bit more of a shape. It's not gonna get a nice natural dome shape like sourdough or your regular bread made with regular gluten flour would, but you can kind of give it that shape with your scraper or your fingers and just kind of smooth out the rough parts on top as well. And that is it. What I'm gonna do now is I'm going to take this, I'm gonna take a piece of saran wrap. I'm gonna spray it lightly with oil or rub oil lightly on the saran wrap, cover this, and I'm gonna let it sit for 1.5 minimum up to about 3 hours. I want it to rise a good inch or so. At least we're trying to get it to the top of my pan here. So good 1/2 inch minimum. If I can get more of a rise out of it, awesome. But like I said, 1.5 to 3 hours at a nice warm room temperature, and then it should be ready for our next step. So I'm gonna cover this up and we'll be back. Thanks. All right, we are back. My bread has been rising. I've preheated my oven to 425 degrees and I'm getting ready to pop it in there. I'm just gonna spray the surface of the dough with a little bit of water before I do that, and it's gonna bake for about an hour. Can't wait to show you how it turns out. So here is our final product. I baked this gluten-free sourdough bread last night, and then once it came out of the oven, you want to make sure when the time is up, it bakes for an hour, that the internal temperature reaches 200 degrees so you know it's cooked through, because it's hard to tell otherwise. So I just use a meat thermometer. I stick it right down in the center of the bread and let it get up to temp to make sure it's to 200, and it usually is, but it's good to check. And then the great thing is you let it rest in the pan for about 15 minutes to cool off a little bit before you try to take it out. That's important. And I just used the parchment paper that was lining the pan to simply help me lift it out. And I put it on a cooling rack. You can cover it with a tea towel and let it rest for a few hours to cool completely. So here it is, it's cooled completely and it's great, you guys. I can't wait to enjoy it. So I'm gonna slice into it here. It's so good. I'm so excited. Like I said, my son just wanted to live off this last time I made it. And you can see the inside is great. Got a little bit of aeration. It's dense too, but it's not horribly dense considering it's a gluten-free bread. And you've got the little bit of the added quinoa we put into it and the oats and the sunflower seeds. They add a great texture, a great flavor to it. And I can't wait to enjoy this. So I hope you make your own so you can enjoy it as well. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining me. Say yes to gluten-free sourdough bread, the yes lifestyle way. Have a good one.